Okay, editing in Lightroom can be kind of confusing with all the different sliders that we have. And I'm gonna show you what each of these do to impact your photo to go from this to this. But I also want to talk about the storytelling side of editing, because editing is not only about making your photos look like Instagram bangers. It's also about enhancing and shaping the story of your photo with contrast and color. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through my entire Lightroom editing workflow and the thought process behind my editing to enhance the story and feeling of my photo. So let's just get right into it. Okay, before we actually apply any edits, we have to make sure that we have an objective, something we want to edit towards to shape the story of our photo. So in this case, the story and the feeling of this photo for me is a kind of contrast between this night look that looks kind of cold outside, and that is contrasted with a rather warm light from this shop right next to our subject right here. And yeah, we have these blue tones outside that are kind of cold, and that's a nice contrast between this light in the shop, and also a nice contrast to our subject, because our subject doesn't look too cold. She has this headband on, if we zoom in a little bit, a headband, a nice coat, and my subject doesn't look like it's freezing, so I don't want to make this photo too cold just because it's night and outside, and I want to kind of play with the contrast between cold outside and warm inside, and the cozy feeling that I'm getting from this, I think, restaurant with this nice warm light. And I want to shape all my edits around that. So firstly, to focus on my subject, I'm going to crop this image, because I noticed that there's a lot of things in this composition that don't need to be there to focus on what I just mentioned. So I'm going to hit R on Windows, or you can just click this crop overlay here. And I'm going to choose a portrait orientation, simply because the left side of the image and the right side, they don't have anything that is important for my story. So I'm just gonna probably go 4:5 and then press X to go into portrait orientation. And now I might crop it just a little bit to get rid of this lamppost that is kind of too close to the edge. Okay, like this probably. And I want to get rid of this blue thing here. So like this, get my subject a little more in the middle, like that. Okay, this should do the trick for now. Yeah, pretty good. Maybe just move it a little more downwards. Okay. Yeah, this is pretty good. Okay, so next up, basic corrections like lens correction. Just hit check these two boxes. They are making sure that any lens distortion or any vignette your lens adds to the photo is kind of negated. So yeah, always do that. And next up is transforming. Usually I'll just hit level to make sure that the photo is kind of straight. But in this case, I don't think I need to. I'll just have a look at what it does. And it honestly, in this photo, it looks kind of off. So I'm gonna turn it off, but using level or just rotating the image like left to right, you can manually straighten it if you shot it kind of crooked. Okay, I'll turn it off for now because I like the way it looks. Okay, next up is basic exposure corrections. So as you might notice, this photo is kind of dark. You can see on the histogram that a lot of the tones are on the left side, which is the shadow side. And I'm only using the histogram to see if I have anything clipped. So if my highlights are blown out or my shadows are kind of crushed. So I'll just see by clicking on this triangle, you can see the highlights clipping. So everything that is red here is an area that is completely white. There is no detail in there. And that makes kind of sense because these are just like LED lamps. And yeah, it's just very bright. And I can make sure to kind of pull them down to make sure they are not completely white at least, because it's not that much of a pleasant look. And you can do the same for the shadows. If you just click on it, you'll see here we have some areas that are completely dark without any detail. But I feel like that is okay because these areas are not that important to the photo and it's only a tiny fraction of the image that is affected. So it's not too bad, but we will do some exposure adjusting to make sure we salvage anything that we want to save. So just turn this off. And exposure wise, I will probably just pull down the highlights because they are clipped. Okay, if you just click on here, you can see now we don't have any highlights clipped, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, we just salvaged that a little bit. And then when it comes to the shadows, I'm just gonna leave these shadows and white sliders for now. Simply because this image is pretty well exposed in my opinion. What I'm gonna do is check the blacks. If you press Alt and then drag the slider, you can see that everything that is black in this overlay is kind of true black. And if you pull them up, you can see that the more you brighten the blacks, the less of these areas you have. To be honest, 0 was a good starting point because it's only a bit that is true black. If you pull it down, of course, you would have much more. If it would look like that, I would just pull it up a little bit, but this is totally fine. So I'm going to keep it at that for now. I might come back to this later though. Next up is presence and the texture, clarity and dehaze. Texture, I usually never use globally. I will use it locally with masking. So we'll save it that for now. Clarity, I always use negative clarity, simply because I like a bit of a softer look, and using negative clarity makes your image look a little bit softer. If you pull it to the left, you can see that it softens kind of everything. But of course, we want to use it sparingly. If you would do it the other way, you'd see we have just, yeah, we would get a very strange look. So yeah, just pull it down a little bit to get a bit of a softer look and to get a little bit of glow in the highlights. Dehaze is somewhat similar. If you would have a lot of haze and you pull it to the right, you would get rid of that haze, for example. And yeah, that kind of strengthens the contrast in your image. And if you pull it to the left, you will add some kind of haze and make it look a little bit softer again and add a little bit of a glow to your photo. The thing is, with dehaze, it also affects your contrast. So you want to be very careful and not overdo it. So you'll see that it gets very bright if you overdo it. So I'll just go from 0 to see what it does. And then I just, this is too much already. Yeah, maybe like -5 is good. We will add some contrast back, don't worry, but we'll do that in the tone curve. But before we do that, we'll add some saturation. And we can use vibrance or saturation sliders for that. Okay, when it comes to vibrance, Lightroom is kind of smart and says, okay, if you increase the vibrance, I will firstly increase the saturation of the least saturated areas. And only later on, if you go very high, it'll increase the saturation of the very saturated areas. So if you increase it here, you can see we get a little bit of a, more saturation, but it's more of a pleasant look. If you do the same with saturation, Lightroom will just from the beginning increase saturation in everything, and that kind of gives your photo an unrealistic look. That just looks very, doesn't look too pleasant. Everything is suddenly oversaturated very quickly. So I'm not going to use saturation. If you decrease vibrance, Lightroom will decrease the most saturated areas first, and then later on the least saturated. So in this case, I usually go for something like 15 or maybe 20. Not too much. We want to keep it subtle. But yeah, this is it for the basic adjustments. Next up is the tone curve. So what I like to do is firstly put one point in the middle, because that are the midtones, and you usually don't want to change the contrast in the midtones, because that'll just give your image a very strange look. If you just put it down like this, you'll see everything is affected and you are not adding contrast, you're just putting everything down. So one point in the middle, and then here you can see what areas are affected most. So we have a lot of shadows on this side, and I'll just see if I pull them down to add some contrast. Maybe like this. This is already a lot. Maybe I'll add another point. This area targets only the darker portions. So this helps me to protect the shadows on my subject, to not make them too dark, and target areas that are a little bit like the foreground that is already a little bit darker, to make that, a little bit darker. I think I like this. Maybe I'll drag down this a little tiny bit. Yeah, this is pretty good. Okay, next up, the highlights on the right side. Here you could, of course, pull them down, but usually if you want to add contrast, an S-curve is the way to go. And I'll just increase the highlights a little bit to make them just pop a little bit more. Okay, this is pretty good. Let's just quickly look at the before and after. If we click on this eye, You can see this is already looking way better, and you can see that our image looked kind of flat beforehand, also because of the exposure adjustments, but because of these adjustments, we can now kind of add a little more contrast in, and afterwards, yeah, we have some nice contrast. Now the thing is, with this tone curve, you can always build it from scratch. I usually just use my own presets to not always do the same kind of edit. And I suggest that you build your own presets to not always have to do the same kind of edit again, because presets are very good to save time in editing and to kind of get a consistent look over and over again. So I'm gonna build this entire photo from scratch, but I do have my own presets. So if you like the style of this editing, you can check them out via the link in the description. And yeah, I'll just show you what some of these do. Obviously, this one's done for daytime, so it doesn't work too much. But what we can do, like this one, is pretty good. I like the look of this one. This one was made for nighttime. Yeah, we are going to get somewhat of that look with the edit I'm going to show you. But yeah, this is just a great way to very quickly get a baseline for your edits. And also, I just released them. They're my first digital product, so to say. So I do have a launch price. And again, yeah, you can check them out via the link in the description. But yeah, let's get on with the editing. So I'm gonna leave the RGB tone curves for now. I'm gonna use them for color grading. But firstly, when it comes to color, we have an order in which we should do that. So usually, I'll adjust white balance first, because white balance is a non-destructive way of changing the overall color in your photo. So if you move it to the left, you'll see that it gets colder, which is not what I want. If you move it to the right, it gets warmer. And of course, you can overdo it to get some kind of specific look, but we want to be very subtle with this again. So double clicking on it resets it. I'll just use it very sparingly here, and I'll see, yeah, this is good for now. I just want to add a little bit of warmth to underline the feeling of my subject feeling kind of cozy and warm because of this restaurant and the way she's dressed. So this is white balance for now. Next up is calibration. I'll be honest, I don't use it, but I just want to very quickly show you what it does, so you can use it if you feel like that's what you need. Okay, so calibration is a way to tell Lightroom what the color looks like. So it's kind of the first color change that is being applied. So if you change the red primary, you're telling Lightroom, hey, red looks like this. And Lightroom in this calibration panel will change every pixel that has some red in it. So not just the red pixels, every pixel that has some kind of red in it will be affected. So if we drag it down, you'll see, drag it to the left, it'll turn red into magenta. And you'll see that the entire image is affected suddenly, simply because every pixel has some kind of red in it. So that is a way to get kind of always the same kind of red in your photos. And yeah, again, if you move it to the right, it'll move it to orange. And same goes for green primary. They'll move it to yellow on the left or teal on the right, and blue, moving it towards teal and green on the left and purple on the right. I don't use it, so I'm not going to pretend like I am just for the sake of this video, but that is basically what it does. I personally don't need that much control over color, so I won't use it, but what I am going to do is use the HSL sliders. Okay, the basic idea of HSL is to unify the colors that I have, and I want to focus on two colors primarily, blue and orange, because those are the most prominent colors that underline the feeling of my photo, like this contrast of outside being kind of cold and this restaurant and my subject feeling kind of cozy and warm with this orange light. And every other color, I'm going to try to move it into either direction, blue or orange, to kind of have less different colors and again to unify the look of the colors. So when it comes to the reds, I will shift them towards orange, but I'm not gonna make it totally orange. I'm just gonna move it a little bit. And if we check the before and after, we can see it's already a little bit more orange and less punchy. And if you're unsure what the colors in your photos are, I suggest you just take the slider and move it from left to right to 100 and minus 100%, just to see what area in your photo is affected. So if you did this, you'll notice, and you look around, you'll see the sign is affected, but we also have the traffic light in the background, and you see these areas flashing. That is just a good way to see which areas are affected. So I'll just move it a little bit towards orange. Yeah, that is okay. Orange I'm not gonna touch. If you have skin tones very visible in your photo, you wanna be careful with orange because that affects the skin tones the most. But in this case, I don't wanna change the orange to any other hue. The yellows, I might move a little bit more towards orange, just a tiny bit, because if we do it too much, you'll see we have this orange and red that just doesn't go together too well if it's directly on top of each other. So I'm just gonna do it a little bit. Keeping the yellow is not too big of an issue. I'm just gonna move it slightly towards orange. Greens, I don't want any greens. I might move them to the left a little bit, just a tiny bit. Yeah, but I'm gonna get rid of the greens a little more on the other sliders. Yeah, aquas, I'm not gonna change. I don't feel like I need to change any aquas. I do have a little bit, but yeah, they are fine the way they are. Blues, I'm gonna move a little more towards the left side because I do like to have a little more bright blues. Again, we don't have too much blue in here, just a little bit. That is good. Purple, I'm gonna move more towards blue. I don't want any purple in my photo, and magenta is going to go more towards the right or the left. Yeah, I'm gonna choose right because the sign gets a little bit brighter if I move it to the left. So yeah, I want the sign to not be too dark. Yeah, which is why I moved the magenta towards the left. Okay, saturation I'm gonna skip for now. I'm gonna come back to it after luminance because luminance also impacts saturation. Reds I'm gonna see, I might make them a little brighter. Yeah, just a tiny bit. Again, I want the sign to not be too punchy, and I want it to be kind of, yeah, a little less saturated, and adding some luminance helps me achieve that without making it look too faded and gray. Orange, I might, no, oranges are fine, I think. I don't want to change the luminosity. Yellows might make it a little bright. No, making it brighter makes it look a little too prominent. So moving it down, double tap to see what it looks like without. Yeah, this is fine. I don't want to change that. Greens, yeah, not gonna touch those. Blues, maybe. Yeah, I don't want to change the blues too much. I think luminance is pretty much fine. We don't want to overdo it. Just because we can change the sliders doesn't mean we have to. So yeah, this is pretty good. And now for saturation, I'm just gonna boost the oranges a little bit because I want to emphasize the oranges and the warm feeling of my photo. Yeah, okay, let's not overdo it. Yeah, that's pretty good. Again, what does it look like without and with? Kind of subtle, but I like it. Okay, greens, I'm gonna move down a little bit because I don't need any green in this photo. And it's also very hard to shift towards orange or blue. So yeah, this is fine without it looking fake, I mean. Yeah, aquas are fine. Blues, do I want to boost the saturation? No, I don't think so. Yeah, light blue and light blue is not too saturated, so it's makes sense to not do that. Yeah, decrease saturation of purple a little bit. Again, because I don't want purple to be too strong, and magenta doesn't affect my sign too much. Yeah, so I'm just gonna decrease it a little bit. Yeah, okay, that's it for color mixer. Okay, next up is, I'm not gonna do color grading now. I'm firstly gonna come back to the tone curve. And I'm gonna use the blue channel to make the shadows a little more blue. The reason I'm using this one instead of the color wheel, I'm gonna use those two, but I'm using this one because this gives me more control over which part of the shadows are being targeted. So if I'm using this portion right here, I'm only targeting the very dark portions of my image. So if I drag it towards blue, meaning I drag it up, I just increase the cold feeling of the outside, which is, again, remember what we wanted, increasing the cold feeling of the outside and contrasting it with the window. So this is already too much. I'm just gonna do it very slightly. I'm just gonna undo it to see what it does. Press Ctrl Z to redo it. Okay. Control Shift Z to revert this. Okay, yeah, looks pretty good. Again, we want to keep it subtle. We don't want to overdo it just because we can. And then I'm gonna add some yellows, but only to the, not to the brightest highlights. I'm gonna check if I can do this. Drag it down. This should affect the window. Yeah, but we don't wanna do it too much. Adding a little bit of yellow, just a tiny bit to make them a little more warmer. Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, if we just take it out. Yeah, you know what? I'm just gonna add the tiniest bit of yellow. If we overdo it, well, that looks awful. Yeah, maybe just like that. That is pretty good. Just a tiny bit. Okay, that's pretty good. That is it for the tone curve. Now I'm gonna use the color grading very sparingly. The thing is, with these color wheels, when editing the shadows, the bottom left one, if I overdo it, you'll see that it just targets everything, and this is a night shot. So I have a lot of shadows and I don't want to target all of the shadows. So I'm just gonna do a little, maybe like this, because I do have a lot of shadows on the outside compared to the inside. And if we press this one, we can see how it affects our image. Again, this is a rather subtle change. Yeah, I like it. This is already looking good. And then for the highlights, I'm going to move into the opposite direction. This is too much. Okay. This should do the trick. Yeah, this just adds a little bit of a color contrast that helps me kind of underline this feeling and contrast the two colors. If we turn it off, overall and on, it is super subtle, but there's just a tiny bit, that it does to our image. Okay, this one looks pretty good. I'm gonna come back to basic and see if I need to pull down the shadows just a tiny bit. Yeah, just a little bit to add a little more contrast, very slightly. Again, I'll see if I'm clipping the whites or the highlights. Doesn't look like it. The blacks, again, totally fine, just a tiny bit. So I'm gonna leave these for here. Yeah, I think this is it for that. Now I'm gonna add some masking to highlight my subject. Okay, firstly, I'm gonna delete this. This one was the brush I used to show you something. So I'm gonna click on objects and select my subject. Just brush around your subject. And Lightroom will do a pretty good job of marking it. Okay, it didn't target the back, so I'm just gonna click on the mask, click on add, and use a brush. Or you know what? I'm just gonna click on add and use select objects, and then zoom in a little bit, and then use your mouse wheel to kind of make the brush bigger or smaller, and then paint around the back, and this should do the trick to add it to the selection. Yeah, looks good. Okay, now I'm just gonna increase the exposure. So I do have a custom brush, but I'll show you what it does. Yeah, this kind of highlights our subject. I think 0.2 is a little bit too much, so I'm gonna use 0.1. So it adds exposure, 0.1 in this case. And the other thing it does is add texture. So texture, as I mentioned in the beginning, I'm only using it locally to emphasize the details on my subject. If I were to drag it all the way up, you'll see that my subject is kind of, it just looks a little bit crunchy. And this is obviously too much, but it pulls out the details and increases the contrast of anything that you're applying it to. So I'm gonna drag it down a little bit. And if you press the I, you can see that it just adds a little bit of more contrast and more detail to our subject, which is what we want. Okay, my notebook suddenly started to make some noises. I hope you can hear it. It sounds like it's about to take off, but I do have a lot of software running to record this. So I hope you can excuse me. Yeah, this is all the settings the mask adds. So let's have a look how it looks without it. So without and with, you can see we have a very subtle highlighting of our subject. Again, we want to keep it subtle. but this helps us to kind of make our subject stand out just a little bit more compared to the other lights and everything. So yeah, the other thing I'm gonna do is add a vignette. And if you press Shift and M, or you just click on Create New Mask and use a radial gradient, we can do this. And then press Shift and the hashtag key to invert it. Or you can just click on the 3 dots over here and invert. Does the same thing. And what we want to do is target everything around our subject. So the red area is everything that is being targeted. Yeah, you can show the overlay by pressing O on Windows, or just click on Show Overlay. If you uncheck it, you can see it. If you check it, you'll see what areas are affected. And now I'm just gonna drag the exposure down a little bit. Yeah, this probably, yeah, well, this is too much. Yeah, I'm gonna use minus 0.2 or 0.1, I think. This is again very subtle. We don't want people to see that we're adding too much of a vignette. I don't like that. Yeah, this is pretty good. I might just make it a little bigger. I feel like our subject is affected too much. Yeah, this is already good. Okay, show overlay. And then, yeah, I might have to do this. Yeah, this needs to be a little bigger. Okay, hide overlay, with and without. Yeah, way better, way better. Okay, this again helps us to draw the eye into the photo a little more and kind of helps us make everything around our subject a little bit darker. And that in turn highlights our subject a little more. Okay, last thing I'm gonna do is add another radial gradient to this window, and I'm just gonna emphasize it ever so slightly. Whoops. Sorry, that was my clock. Yeah, I'm just gonna do this. I'm going to increase the temperature a tiny bit to make it a little bit warmer. Yeah, this is it. Super subtle. But the thing is, this also kind of affects our subject because it goes over our subject. And that doesn't make any sense because the subject isn't hit too much by this warm light. So I don't want our subject to be hit by that. We can simply click on the mask, then click on Subtract, and then select Objects, and then brush around anything that we want subtracted, like this. And now if we press O, okay, we can see everything around our subject is kind of subtracted. You can also, if it's unclear, so the back is also still highlighted, you can change the overlay to white on black to see which areas are affected. So black is not affected, white is everything that is affected. So I'm gonna subtract, again, use a brush, and I'm just gonna paint over the back to make sure it's not affected by the mask, because that wouldn't make sense. Okay, just like this. Okay, yeah, this is decent enough. Okay, now we can just change overlay to color overlay, remove it. Yeah, this is looking better. And now if we turn off all the masks, we can see that it is very subtle, but there is the subject is just a little more highlighted, and I just like it way better. And that's a very good way to kind of, yeah, highlight your subject very subtly. And yeah, that's pretty much it for masking. Last thing I'm gonna do is add details, or rather sharpen the image. So usually I press Alt and then drag this slider up. And this overlay shows you which areas are being targeted by sharpening. So the white areas are targeted by sharpening. Everything that is black is not being sharpened. I usually go for somewhere between 70 and 80 to not target everything. And yeah, sharpening wise, I go to somewhere between 60 and 80. So if we turn this off and on, yeah, it's very subtle, but this is usually enough. I don't bother too much with sharpening. This is just something I do on all of my images to make sure that only the most important details are being highlighted. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And yeah, that's it. And from here on, I'm just going to export it and post it to Instagram or wherever I want to post it, export it for a YouTube video. Yeah, but this is pretty much everything I do to kind of highlight this story. Again, the goal was to emphasize the entire feeling of my subject being outside where it's kind of cold, which is why the shadows outside are more bluish, and highlighting the warm feeling of this restaurant to kind of underline how my subject looks and feels. So yeah, again, if you like this kind of edit, again, I do have my presets that you can check out via the link in the description. And yeah, other than that, I hope this video helps you create with more intention. If you liked this video, I would appreciate it if you liked it, if you subscribed for more videos like these, talking about storytelling, photos, and editing. And yeah, I'll see you next Wednesday.